You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today we have what I think is a fascinating show for you because it's about China. Yeah, the sleeping giant. Not so sleepy anymore. China, with its enormous landmass and immense population, 1/4 of all people on the planet. My guest today for the special conversation is a returnee to Women's Media Center Live, the author Leta Hong Fincher, who's here to talk about the 10th anniversary republication of her famous book, Leftover Women, and who will also talk about developments, great leaps forward or great leaps backward, in China over this past decade. Now, also, some of you have contacted me asking why I haven't weighed in about the Middle East war. And the answer is quite simple. I have beloved friends whom I love who are Israelis, and beloved friends whom I love who are Palestinians, who even lived in Gaza. And my heart is utterly shattered about this crisis. But today, instead of going inside the headlines segment, I will speak about this compounded tragedy at the end of the program. But first, so that we don't have to break our conversation, we need to take a break. I'll be back in just a moment with Leta Hong Fincher.
Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Leta Hong Fincher is an American journalist, feminist, and writer. She's written for the New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, Ms., Harper's Bazaar, and others. As a longtime TV and radio journalist based in China, she won the Society of Professional Journalists Sigma Delta Chi Award, the Cowan Award for Humanitarian Reporting, and other journalism honors for her reporting. Her previous book, Betraying Big Brother, The Feminist Awakening in China, was named Best Book of the Year by Vanity Fair, Newsweek, Foreign Policy, Interrupted, Bitch Media, and others. It was also a New York Times New and Noteworthy Pick. The New York Public Library named Betraying Big Brother one of its essential reads on feminism. Leta's first book, Leftover Women, The Resurgence of Gender Inequality in China, of 2014, was named one of the top 5 China books of the year by the Asia Society's China File, and one of the best Asian books of the year by Asia House. It was on the New York Times list of recommended books on China in 2018 and on Book Riot's list of 21 recommended Chinese history books in 2021. Leta is the first American to receive a PhD from Tsinghua University's Department of Sociology in Beijing. She graduated from Harvard magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in East Asian languages and civilizations, and she was awarded a Shaw Fellowship and Shorenstein Fellowship for her master's degree in East Asian Studies from Stanford University. She is currently a research associate at the Weatherhead East Asian Institute, Columbia University. Leta, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much for having me back on again, Robin. It's just a delight.
Well, it's time. It's definitely time, because I think you were on when your book first came out, your remarkable book, and it's now in its 10th anniversary edition with updates and new preface and prefatory note and so forth. Leftover Women: The Resurgence of Gender Inequality in China. And it will be out on November 30th, but probably is on pre-order now. So I would get my copy in advance, because it is sort of the book on China today. China has more men than women. National Bureau of Statistics data in 2021 show that there are almost 35 million more men than women in China. And your book focuses primarily on college-educated Han Chinese women, the consequences of a state media campaign regarding leftover so-called women since 2007, and unprecedented gender inequality. Let's start with the inequality in wealth created by China's privatization of housing and real estate boom. Let's talk about how women missed out on the biggest accumulation of residential real estate wealth in history, and why.
Yes. Well, I mean, as you said, there have been a lot of kind of depressing developments over the last decade, or going beyond the last decade. One of the big themes in this book is how the privatization of housing in China really sidelined women. It's kind of complicated, so I don't want to go into all of the details. But effectively, in the early communist era, because of socialized housing was free. It was basically given away, and people didn't paid a really tiny little nominal sum. So with the privatization of housing, you started to have the government just encouraging people to buy their own homes. And when I was doing my research, I mean, of course, I knew that there was this really hot real estate boom going on, and everybody was in a frenzy. And in Chinese cities, I was living in Beijing when I was doing my PhD in sociology at Tsinghua University, and I noticed that young people getting married were really anxious to buy homes. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to write a paper for my class on these real estate agents. Mm-hmm. And I started doing interviews, and I discovered, I was very disturbed to discover that a lot of these young women who are buying apartments were actually giving their hard-earned savings over to their boyfriends in many cases, or maybe new husbands, to buy an apartment. But the apartment would not have the woman's name on the deed. And so that's just one element of how women were shut out of this, really probably the largest accumulation of real estate wealth in history. And another element was just how the parents of these women really discriminated against their own daughters in many cases. And so parents would scrape and save and make major sacrifices to buy homes for their sons, and basically not do the same thing for their daughters. And so there are all these different ways in which women are really severely discriminated against in the accumulation of this real estate wealth. And it does get kind of complicated.
Well, you show that that studies prove that over 70% of women contribute to the marital home purchase, but only 30% of marital home deeds include the woman's name. And I wanted to ask you about this. The Supreme Court's latest interpretation in 2011 specified that unless legally contested, marital property essentially belongs to the person who owns the home and whose name is on the property deed. And in China today, that person is usually a man. Has it been legally contested? Because the marriage law of 1950 granted women rights to property, divorce, and freedom of choice in marriage, among other rights, now being leached away. So has it been legally contested, the Supreme Court's interpretation?
Well, you have to understand that basically there is no rule of law in China today, and so it's extremely difficult to challenge something at that high level. So what has been happening is there are definitely women in response to this big change in the law in 2011. A lot of women are trying to sue, married women, that is, who are getting divorced, are trying to sue for their share of the home. But one of the things I discovered in updating this book is that, the problems for married women extend so far beyond just missing out on sharing marital wealth in the form of real estate. It's actually become even more difficult for women to get divorced in recent years.
Yeah.
The government is making it much, much more difficult. In 2021, the government announced this new so-called divorce cooling off period, basically saying that if you want to get a divorce, you have to wait. Legally, it's at least a month before you can even file for a divorce. And there's been a lot of new research showing that it's virtually impossible for women to get a divorce if their partner doesn't want them to divorce.
My God.
It's so and so certainly in the case of property wealth, then it's virtually impossible for women to share in that marital property wealth unless the home is in her name alone. But even if it's jointly registered property with both a woman and a man's name, it's just virtually impossible unless the husband agrees. But this is one of the depressing developments for women.
My God, it's you show very steadily and very coolly the areas that it has gone. The violence against women statistics are off the map. And when COVID hit, the first thing that I thought of when there were lockdowns, the first thing I thought of was all those countries, the Middle East, India, China, where women's rights are so behind, even worse than here. And believe me, it's bad, as you know, in the United States. The first thing I thought of was, oh my God, all those women shut up with all those men, and those men taking it out on them. So that there's that. There's social control in eugenics, isn't there? I mean, that blew me away. That the government is obsessed with, state media campaigns about maintaining social stability in the midst of all this discontent, urging women to serve a state program to upgrade population quality and have a high quality baby for the good of the nation, and details and eugenics on the government's population engineering program, with accounts of forced sterilization of Uyghur and other ethnic minority women thought low quality. Isn't this new for China? I mean, this is a great leap backwards.
Yes, it is. It really is. I mean, when I originally wrote this book, I was doing an analysis of this propaganda campaign about the so-called leftover women. And I basically made the argument that I believed that the government was spreading this campaign to shame educated single women and to stigmatize them and make them feel like they had to hurry up and get married or it would be too late and no man would ever want them. And basically I made the argument that I believed that it was tied to this strain of eugenics in the Chinese government that has been there for many decades. But this was a new development. This propaganda campaign starting in 2007, just spreading the term "shengnu," leftover women. It's a new propaganda campaign, basically taking aim at the unprecedented numbers of college-educated women in China. So that, that itself, the fact that women are so much more educated today, they're better educated today than ever before in Chinese history. Now, that should be something to be celebrated.
But it's perceived as a threat, isn't it?
It is perceived as a great threat. And just in the last, over the last 9 to 10 years, there's been a lot of these different changes where the government is more aggressively pushing these Han Chinese educated women to have more than one baby, because, when my book first came out, it was a one-child policy.
Right.
Today, it's actually a 3-child policy.
Oh, it went up to 3.
It's a 3-child policy today. So there's that side of the population engineering equation, which is trying to push the so-called high-quality Han Chinese educated women, trying to push them into getting married and having more babies. But then there's the other side, which is also happening primarily in Xinjiang, with where the ethnic Uyghur women, primarily Uyghur, but also Kazakh women who are part of the ethnic minority, considered to be quote unquote low quality and political troublemakers. And since 2017, there's been a sharp drop in the birth rate in Xinjiang among ethnic minorities. And I also interviewed a Uyghur woman who herself had experienced, she'd been forcibly sterilized. So that's the other side of that equation. But it is part of this very grand population engineering project on the part of the Chinese government.
Wow. This was the first, major world modern revolution that seemed to put women front and center. With Mao's Women Hold Up Half the Sky, and with women in the Red Brigades, and this seemed to be speak bitterness campaigns and so forth and so on. So it's particularly disheartening that this kind of corruption at the top and down all the way through, as well as a kind of social control that is really draconian, is heartbreaking. I mean, you give historical context to the erosion of this, and because in the Song dynasty, you say 1,000 years ago, more property was transferred to women than at any other time in Chinese history, and the movement for women's emancipation in the Republican period conflicted actually with the communist revolutionary rhetoric of gender equality. Oh, God, it's so depressing. I mean, because it's, it's 1/8 of all women in the world. And so I always think to myself, well, when China goes feminist, wow, that's going to be that. Then we've won it. And a good friend of mine is now the filmmaker Violet Du Feng, who did the wonderful documentary Hidden Letters, which was shortlisted for the Oscars, and is an incredible movie, just so moving. And she has reported. She just was back in China, and she's reported on the backtracking. It's in a sense it's happened with every government in the world, and I blame Trump for setting an example. But it's just particularly heartbreaking in China, and violence against women, which is epidemic everywhere, but particularly in China. Domestic violence is all the worst because there's virtually no legal protections that actually work, and the police uphold those standards, not changeable ones. For a woman to move, I had not remembered this from your book last time. For a woman to move residence, for anyone to move residence, you need a permit. Am I wrong?
Yes. Yes, you do, and that's the main reason that they do. The government has. They say that they've set up some shelters for women who are victims of abuse, intimate partner violence, but nobody ever goes there because you have to get a permit saying that you're allowed to live somewhere. I mean, even if you go to a hotel overnight, you have to get a permission to stay there. And so this problem, the severe controls on mobility, became especially acute during the pandemic, of course, because China had what was called a zero COVID policy. And it was incredibly draconian, where they were literally shutting people in their homes and not letting them out of their homes in many cases.
Yeah.
And so, it's impossible to know just how severe the domestic violence became, but just anecdotally talking to different people, it was a really severe problem. And you can just imagine being basically imprisoned in your home with your abuser. But I want to say that it's actually not entirely depressing. I mean, it's depressing when you consider the government policy, but what I have been really heartened by is this really significant wave of new resistance coming from young Chinese women, I was just going to get to that. Okay.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I do want to get into that because actually, when I was originally doing my interviews for the first edition of the book, which was when I was doing my PhD in sociology in Beijing, I was very, very demoralized by all of these interviews I did. And I just felt like a lot of the women just felt that there was nothing they could do about their situation. And so that they thought that they had to get married, even though they really didn't like the guy they were engaged to, but it's those women who haven't married yet who are really making a difference. And basically there's a very strong trend now among young women, especially those who've gone to college, of just saying that they do not want to get married and they don't want to have children. They recognize that marriage is in many ways a trap. It's become a patriarchal trap in China. For many reasons. And so this is one area where they actually are able to control their lives as young women. They can say, well, I'm going to take charge of my destiny. I'm not going to get married. I want to do what I believe in. I want to go and advance my education, or I want to go and work. And that doesn't mean saying no to romance and love, but it does mean recognizing that marriage as an institution is kind of a trap for women in China.
Right. So, I was going to ask you about that. In fact, you cite, I can't find it right now, but you cite a number of areas and cities in China that are showing real, attention-getting dips in statistics of women who are getting married, and suddenly it's gone from this to half of it. You think that this is a new form of protest? I mean, clearly, maybe it's unconscious, maybe it's conscious, maybe it's semi-conscious, but it seems to be a form of resistance of women just aren't marrying, which is amazing and wonderful. I mean, I just love it.
Yeah. I mean, it really kind of crosses an entire spectrum, where there are definitely women. I mean, even when I was originally writing this book, doing my interviews 10 years ago, or even more than 10 years ago, there were women who told me, women who were only in their 20s, who said, I am never going to get married. But back then, that was a rarity. But today, there are more and more women like that who deliberately say, and this is a form of resistance for them, and they're very clear about that.
Wow.
But then, of course, Yeah, but then of course there are other women who, don't think of themselves as being political in any way, or
Oh
they
yeah.
may not even identify as feminist in any way, but they say, I'd rather just not get married. Or, after maybe some of them have gone on a lot of blind dates and have been, pressured a lot by their parents. After a number of years, they say, they wise up and, I don't think this marriage thing is all it's cracked up to be. But I see all of these new developments over the last decade as being positive, because it's these women seeing where they can take control of their life and doing it. Because it is, I mean, it's you can't protest without risking possibly even in some cases a long jail term in China. And so it's extremely risky to participate in any kind of political protest. But this is a way for really millions of women to take control of their lives.
And it's very subtle and very sophisticated in its own way. I mean, it's, whether or not they're aware of the fact that there's no such crime on the books as marital rape in China, or whether they're more attuned to property inequality, or however, or custody of children, or pressure from the government, pressure from families. They're just opting out, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. They can't put them in prison for not marrying. That may come, but it at least hasn't landed yet. I wish this would spread, to other countries. I think it's absolutely amazing. I know that, and I have followed the more showy forms of protest. I mean, a number of cases of extraordinarily brave women, Lima Z, and there's quite a few that, and you talk about all of them who have braved the government, and the Feminist Five women, and talk a little bit about them, because they're not so subtle, but they're very courageous.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually wrote quite a lot about the political forms of feminist activism in China in my second book, which was called Betraying Big Brother: The Feminist Awakening in China. And I mean, I get into that a little bit in this 10th anniversary edition of the book Leftover Women. One of the women I originally profiled for this book, who's Li Maizi, I interviewed her in 2013. She ended up being jailed in 2015 along with 4 other feminists. They were planning to celebrate International Women's Day by handing out stickers about sexual harassment on subways and buses. Mm-hmm. And on the eve of International Women's Day in 2015, there was a huge roundup by the police in several different provinces in China of feminist activists. Huh. And it was related to just this one effort, which was, I mean, you think would be so benign. They're just handing out these stickers about sexual harassment. But that marked the jailing of these women who became known as the Feminist Five of China. That, to me, I see that as a turning point for feminist activism in China.
Was this before or after the tennis star?
Peng Shuai is the tennis champion. I mean, that was afterwards.
Okay.
But 2015 really marked kind of a clear milestone with the jailing of these feminist activists. There was a lot more awareness among other feminists in China that the government is clearly designating feminist activism as a new political threat, where it didn't see it as a threat in the past.
Right.
And since then, you've seen all sorts of different kinds of feminist activism that is extremely bold and risky. I mean, Peng Shuai, the tennis champion, that was sort of different. She wasn't seeing herself as a political activist, but she posted something on China's version of Twitter, Weibo, about how she was sexually assaulted by a very senior Communist Party official. And then basically her essay was disappeared, and we still don't know exactly what's going on with her, but she hasn't been seen in public in years. There's another important case recently of Sophia Huang Xueqin, who was a prominent Me Too activist in China's version of the Me Too movement. And she had documented sexual harassment among Chinese women who were journalists. And then soon after doing that in 2018, she was detained by the authorities and held in detention. She was detained for 2 years. Nobody really knew where she was. And she was recently put on trial for vague charges of subversion. But we also don't even know any more about her case. We know that she was tried, but again, everything is so opaque. And so she's paying the ultimate price for her activism, because she's actually, serving a jail sentence of some kind. It's not formal jail,
but they're sitting on a powder keg. They must know that, because when there was the this one went worldwide because it was a video, and so it went viral, of the 4 or 5 women who were having a bite in a little cafe, and a man comes up and he tries to hustle one of them, and she deflects him, and the men turn on the women and beat her to a crisp, and then are hauled away and not arrested. The men are not arrested. And I remember it came on television here as a huge outcry in China, that ordinary folks all over the place were outraged and were writing to the government and were saying, how can this be? How can women be harassed in a public place so awfully? And then the men beat up the women and don't get any arrests for it. So they must be, with that kind of thing bubbling under the surface. I mean, I guess I'm asking, how can at one and the same time there be such chaos, lack of law, general confusion at the public level, while there is draconian attempt, at least, at control from the top?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is, this is one of the areas, I mean, feminism, I think, has emerged as this, as a real flashpoint for the expression of a certain different kind of discontent by largely women, but also there's a strong overlap with the LGBTQ plus community as well, because it is related,
Sure.
The government is also cracking down more on the rights of the LGBTQ plus community, and that's related to the feminist struggle as well. But the thing is that it because the government is trying to co-opt the majority Han Chinese part of the population, these educated women, trying to persuade these women to get married and have more babies. It's a little bit, it has to walk a bit of a balancing act on this tightrope, because if the government just carried out mass jailings of feminist activists, that would really result in a huge outcry. And that's something that the government, I believe, must be aware of that. And so this is one of those gray areas where the government can't be too punitive. So because if you look at what it's doing in Xinjiang, for example, I mean, that is where it's detaining so many of the Uyghur population for absolutely no reason whatsoever.
Right.
I mean, that's totalitarianism, and brute force. And because it's an ethnic minority, there isn't this outrage coming from, the entire population of China.
Right.
But when it comes to feminism, the government is actually trying to change its policies. And in fact, Xi Jinping, the ruler now, who's become a real dictator, he just made new comments about how China needs to develop this new childbearing and marriage culture. And so we're going to see a lot more of that top-down policy.
Here we go.
But the government has to be careful as well, because how does it try to encourage women to marry and have babies, and at the same time wipe out all forms of political resistance? It's tricky. This is one of those tricky areas, and that's also what makes it really fascinating.
Yeah, it is extraordinary and very fascinating. Oh, well, thank the goddess that you are on the case and doing the sociological and ethnographic work to cover it. The book is called Leftover Women, and it has a long and serious subtitle, The Resurgence of Gender Inequality in China. But the main thing you need to know is that it's called Leftover Women. It's the 10th anniversary edition. And we should mention also it's, in a sense, companion volume. You want to give the name of the other one later?
Oh, sure. My previous book was Betraying Big Brother, The Feminist Awakening in China.
Right. And together they make a real wallop. And if I were in the Chinese government, I would run like hell. So, no, they are so well written. They read like novels. You can't wait to find out what happens next. And they're so well researched and so thoroughly done in a scholarly way. But they read like a mystery, what will happen next. So thank you for the work that you do. I appreciate it. It's a window into the world's largest population, and well, I guess now they've lost that medal to India, but they're still neck and neck. But China is the great mystery and the one to be won for feminism, because as China goes, so goes the world. Thank you again, Leta.
Thank you so much, Robin. It was a pleasure.
We have to take another brief pause here, but I'll be back directly with some words about the war and a poem to try and staunch the wounds.
The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
If these aren't fighting words, what are they? Just words. We are approaching a point in civil discourse where we begin the slide into madness. To feel and express anguish over what Israel suffered in the Hamas attack becomes instantly equated with denouncing Palestinians, and to mourn in grief for what Palestinians are suffering under Netanyahu's siege of Gaza is to be branded anti-Semitic. By the way, Semitic refers to both Hebrews and Muslims, so anti-Semitism is something that they hideously endure together. As for Netanyahu, well, I guess he got exactly what he wanted. War as the ultimate diversion from scandal. And Hamas obligingly gave it to him.
We Americans and Europeans throw a mantle of Western logic over the Israelis as if they were a reflection of ourselves, but that's not true. They also are a Middle Eastern people, as torrential in their hyperbole and excitement and vengeance as their neighbors are. We invent a fixed boundary between Hamas and the Gazan population, when in truth it's now a porous barrier, worn thin by bitterness over half a century and more. The poet William Butler Yeats wrote, "Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart." So now, when a Palestinian refugee in Gaza looks at a militant, she sees not a terrorist, but a freedom fighter. This in a circumstance of such extremity that both sides tell truths that are saturated in lies. Myself, I had to wait until my emotions cooled so that my brain could function in writing this. All I can offer is a possible interpretation of the ancient origins of this toxic dispute, a theoretical reading through the Bible and Quranic smoke and haze of distortion, religion, yes, of what may have happened long, long before the Balfour Declaration in 1917 blithely gave the unholy land, bleak and stony desert that it is, to Ashkenazic Europeans as a, quote, Jewish state, close quote, out of British guilt after the Nazis had wreaked their hell. That gift was already populated by Palestinians, themselves the descendants over many centuries of Phoenicians. But back to the beginning. The problem is born, of course, with the first patriarch. Abraham, Avram, Abraham. Terah, Abram's father, was, the myth tells us, a descendant of Noah, who lived in Ur of the Chaldees in Mesopotamia near modern-day Iraq. Terah was likely a moon worshipper, as were his ancestors, since his name is etymologically related to the Hebrew root word for moon. A number of sources cite him as, quote, worshipping other gods, close quote, other, that is, from the emerging forms of Yahweh, the vengeful male god who would become the deity of the Hebrew, or Hebrew, tribes. In the book of Joshua, Joshua recounts the history of the Israelite nation, beginning with Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, who lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. Close quote. Terah was an idolater who worshipped the moon goddess Nana, according to the encyclopedia, that one, the Encyclopedia Britannica. So, the father of all patriarchs was himself a goddess worshipper. This seems to have been around the time of the reign of the Sumerian king Sargon the Great, circa 2300 BCE, and the Akkadian Empire. It's fair to assume that Mesopotamia was largely comprised of goddess-worshipping cultures, among them the cults, great cults, widespread, of Ishtar, Astarte, Inanna, all of those being the same goddess. Different faces, different iterations. See my post of 19 December 2022 on Enheduanna, the world's first writer, a high priestess, and the daughter of Sargon. Now, Abraham was born in Ur, although the exact site, of course, is much contested. Yahweh, according to ancient texts, ordered Terah to take his family and go to the land of Canaan, which is parts of present-day Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel-Palestine. It's a region, and was then, in great transition politically and religiously, but he ordered them to settle there. Abraham was 75 at this point and about to become the first patriarch, the founder of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, all monotheistic religions. Following his God's command, Abraham took his wife, Sarai, who was also his half-sister, and his nephew Lot, and the wealth and slaves they had acquired, and traveled to Shechem in Canaan. There was a severe famine in Canaan, so their households traveled on southward to Egypt. On the journey, Abram instructed Sarai to identify herself only as his sister, fearing that the Egyptians would kill him in order to take his wife, because she was very beautiful. When brought before Pharaoh, Sarai said that Abraham was her brother, and the king thereupon took her into his palace, and bestowed upon Abraham many presents and marks of distinction, including the hand of his own daughter, the princess Agar, also called Ajer, also called Hagar. However, when Pharaoh's household was afflicted then with a great plague, Pharaoh realized that Sarai was Abraham's wife as well as his sister, and demanded that they leave Egypt at once. There are numerous accounts of the great friendship and companionship, the love, in fact, between Sarai, Abraham's wife, and the princess, also considered now to be a wife of Abraham, equal to Sarai. But these accounts have lost rather a lot in androcentric translation, since Princess Ajer is variously depicted as a concubine, a bondswoman, or a slave. Only in Savina J. Tubal's well-researched scholarly book, Hagar the Egyptian, The Lost Tradition of the Matriarchs, have I read a thorough account of this friendship, which seems to have lasted decades. In fact, the bond between the two women lasted so long and was so solid that Sarai, having lived in Canaan for 10 years, but still, unfortunately being childless, suggested that Abraham have a child with her Egyptian friend Ajar, and even fought with him when he was reluctant. Well, he finally agreed. Now, at this point, the story diverges, with a misogynistic and androcentric emphasis taking precedence. Competitive tensions over Abraham's affections rose between Sarai and Ajar, and Sarai complained to her husband that this handmaid no longer respected her. At one point, the Egyptian fled, but returned after angels consoled her. Ajar gave birth to Abraham's son Ishmael when Abraham was 86 years old. Some believe that Sarai was originally destined to reach the age of 175, but 48 years of this span of life were taken away from her because she complained of Abraham, blaming him as though he were the cause that Hagar no longer respected her. Then a miracle was granted to her after her name was changed from Sarai to Sarah, and according to one myth, her fertility was restored and she gave birth to Isaac. An interesting aside, an alternate legend connects Sarah's death with Abraham's attempted sacrifice of Isaac, which actually, in this version, took place. Well, Samuel came to Sarah and said, "Your old husband seized the boy and sacrificed him." The boy wailed and wept, but he could not escape from his father. Sarah began to weep and ultimately died of grief in this, I must say, far more normal version. All was not well, it appears, between the first patriarch and the first matriarch. Ishmael and Isaac grew and played together and loved each other as brothers. But property, tradition, inheritance, ownership, in short, patriarchy, came between them. Finally, it infected the two women, their mothers, and Sarah, according to the received version,
complained to Abraham that Isaac was his truest son and should inherit everything. Furthermore, Ishmael and his mother should be sent into exile. Exile. And so it was that with some bread and water, the princess of Egypt and her son by Abraham the patriarch were sent into the wilderness. There they wandered, mourning their losses, and almost died of thirst, until an angel appeared to them, sent apparently by the same ambivalent Yahweh who had counseled Abraham to exile them in the first place. This time the angel found them water in the desert, and eventually brought their wanderings to rest at a place where Ishmael would eventually found the world's center of Islam, a place called Mecca. Isaac, on the other hand, also fulfilled the prophecies by fathering Jacob and Esau, and Jacob by, in turn, fathering the tribes of Israel, with first Leah and then Rachel. Islam follows the other trajectory, of course, honoring Ishmael as an ancestor of Muhammad and revering Hajar as a great matriarch of Islam. The two half-brothers, sons of two women who lived together and loved each other for most of their lives, built themselves into desperate nations of competition and enmity. Some accounts say that Sarah had been a priestess of the moon before the move to Canaan, and numerous accounts claim that status for the Princess Hajar of Egypt. What a deep pity, what a great sorrow, that Abraham, converting from his father's moon goddess worshipping religion instead to a new faith system, heeded neither belief and heeded neither woman. And where, you ask, do intellectual suppositions about ancient studies fit today's grim headlines? How do they address the needs of a child gone so far now into trauma it will take her whole lifetimes to emerge, if then? They don't. But words are all I have. And we close today with a poem from Harvesting Darkness. And the poem is called Regret. After my time, who knows what hells await? Dystopias abound and clocks run late to spend those talents I so long misused or squandered, assuming they'd crawl back, abused but loyal, a cozy lap of purring poems that, tame no more, scuffle through these ruins, leaving the stink of wet fur, snorts, growls, blood trails on the floor. Something prowls wild out of sight, but I can hear it hiss. Too many words to bear, too many lists. A child lies starving, staring at you. She knows. Too much poetry. Needs prose. Failed as a savior, misnamed as a poet. I am a killing field. How can I still not know it? And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan.
You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.